Good morning. I think it's funny, my little girl has gotten so used to doing this that as soon as the video ends, she runs and sits on my dad's lap. I don't even have to move her. In 2006, I got on a plane to spend 3 weeks in a place that I couldn't even find on a map. And when I got to Uganda, I almost immediately fell in love with the people, with the country, and I fell more and more in love with a Jesus who demanded that I love and serve my neighbor, just as I would love myself, and with a Jesus who said that whatever I do for the least of his people, I do unto him. And about as soon as my feet hit American soil, I knew that I had to get back there. He had opened my eyes to this need, and I just so desired to do something about it. I didn't know what I would do, but I wanted to do something, even if it was small, to help out with this need that he had opened my eyes to. And so when I graduated high school, I made a year-long commitment to teach at a school there. I had met a pastor while I was over there who said, hey, we would really need some help. So if you pray about it and you feel like you can come back for whatever period of time, we'd love to have you. So I got back on the plane and had no idea that this year-long commitment would turn into a lifetime commitment. And I got there and I started teaching, and God just began presenting me with these needs. And I saw two major things. I saw children who would come to class for a couple weeks and then they would stop coming. And as I began walking around the villages and visiting them in their homes and trying to figure out why this was that they weren't coming to school anymore, I found out that a lot of them, being orphans, were living with a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle, someone who was really struggling just to get food on the table for these kids and couldn't pay even the minimal amount that we were charging for school fees. I also saw parents come and try to drop their children off at the orphanage, because the orphanage, when you live there, you get to go to school and you get medical care and you get to eat 3 times a day. And so these parents, maybe they weren't able to provide that at home, and they so wanted that for their children that they were willing to leave them at this institution. And so I thought, surely there has to be a way that these children can have their basic needs met, but they can also remain living with their biological families. And so I began emailing my parents and family and friends from home and just saying, hey, for just a very little donation, I would be able to put some of these children back in school, and I would be able to provide them with meals so that they can stay at home with their parents instead of having to come and live in this already overcrowded orphanage. And people who I knew from here who had a little bit extra were willing to give that, and I began sponsoring these children. And slowly, as 10 children who had this need turned into 40 children who had this need, and 40 turned into 100, the organization Amazima was born. And my parents did a lot of the work here stateside to start making this an official organization, as I did some work on the Uganda side. And we've grown, and today we have over 450 sponsored children who are going to school, receiving their meals, receiving their medical care, and then really being equipped with Bible truths. On Saturday, we get together and have a worship service and a time of Bible study led by our worship leader, who's fantastic. And these children are learning Bible truth there, and then they're learning it in their home as our worship leader spends different time in each of their home villages throughout the week, teaching them and their parents about God's love for them. And several months after that, another need arose. Down the street from me, a house fell down on a 9-year-old little girl, and a friend who I was working with in the community, she'd been doing a lot of translating for me because I didn't know the language yet, and she said, oh, Auntie Kate, we have to go to the hospital and we have to visit this little girl. Her house has fallen down on her. And when I got to the hospital, I noticed that she was just lying in this bed, but no one was providing her with any care. So as I began to ask the nurses and the doctors why she wasn't receiving care, they said, well, she doesn't have a parent or a guardian or anyone here who's paying for her treatment, so we can't give her treatment for free, so she's just here. And I said, okay, well, let me pay for whatever you need. And as I began asking my friend who's responsible for this child, she told me that 9-year-old Agnes had been caring for her 5- and 7-year-old sisters for the last 2 years since their dad had died. They'd been living alone in this house, and Agnes, from the ages of 7 to 9, had found herself the primary caregiver of her 2 young sisters. And so I began to think, well, so there's a 7 and a 5-year-old out there somewhere who not only are without their caregiver, but they're without their house. It's now fallen down. And just the logical or obvious answer to me seemed that I have a house, they don't have a house, they can come sleep at my house. And I had no idea in that moment of offering my house to them that adoption was entering my world, but it was. And over the next month or so, as Agnes was recovering in the hospital, I began searching for biological family. I thought, well, we'll get these kids sponsored if we can find them a place to live. And I began searching for a family member or a community member that would care for them. And over several weeks, as no one turned up who was willing or able to care for them, and in prayer, God just continued to confirm, Katie, you are the family that you're looking for. And I'll never forget that as I was praying for that, the youngest, Scovia, walked into my room and called me Mommy. And so just like that, God created this family out of brokenness. And over the course of the next 4 years, he's brought me 10 more daughters. I have 13 in my home now, and they've all just been from situations of me thinking, okay, this child doesn't have anywhere to go in the immediate. I'll invite them into my home and find them somewhere else to go. And 450 times it's looked like sponsorship, but 13 times it's looked like the child staying with me. And so I think that when I speak at things like this and people come in from this side of the story of, oh, this 22-year-old girl, she has this big organization and she has all these children, and either she's a little crazy or she must be this really extraordinary person. And I think I like to tell this story from the beginning because I'm just a normal person, and just in these little ordinary moments of obedience to God, he has made my life something that I could have never imagined. And just that in the open door of going to Uganda, and I said yes and stepped through that door, he made it another open door of someone who had a need, and I said yes to meet that need. And slowly, just one person at a time, he has multiplied this thing into something I could have never imagined. And he's so faithful to do that in all of our lives, that just if we will be obedient in the small, he is faithful in the big. And so I just want to share with you guys some stories today. I feel like I could share with you different statistics and let you know that 50% of Uganda is under the age of 15, and that 2 million of those children are orphaned. But I think that I want to make it real for you, and so I just want to share some stories of God's faithfulness in my life just in the past year. Just that he is who he says he is, just that in my obedience to opening my home to people, and really my children's obedience is usually the forerunner to that. They convince me, Mom, you have to let this person live with us or eat dinner with us or whatever that looks like. But just that he's faithful to multiply that. The first story I want to share with you is the story of my friend Juliet, who made this bracelet. She used to be a prostitute. And she has 4 little girls, and she would put them to bed, and then she would sneak out in the night to sell her body because she had no other way to make an income. And she would try to get back in the morning before her children woke up, and she's HIV positive. And so she knew that she was HIV positive, and she knew she was spreading her disease by doing this, and she felt horrible about it and didn't want to, but she literally felt like she had nowhere else to turn to make an income. And there are 20 women with similar stories in a community where I work, and about 2 years ago I began teaching them to make this jewelry. The beads are actually made of rolled up recycled paper. And so they roll the beads and they varnish them, and Juliet's been doing this for 2 years now, and so I resell these necklaces in the States. And with the money that they make, they're able to keep about half of it is what they need to sustain their family and provide for their basic needs, and then about half of it they put in savings, so that if in a couple years they decide they want to do something else with their life, or they want to start a new business, or they want to buy a small piece of land that they can grow food on, they have some savings so that they'll be able to do that. And then with the extra profits from this necklace, we are able to take those profits and put them back into a feeding program that takes place in the same community, where over 2,000 children are getting nutritious lunch at school every day. And so Juliet and her friends who are in this group now have such great pride in the fact that not only can they provide for their own family, which is such a joy for a parent, but they're providing for their entire community. I see her dancing. That's great. They're able to provide healthy meals for their entire community. And I've seen not only that, but I do Bible study with these women every Tuesday morning, and Juliet, about a year ago, came to know Christ. And I've seen such a huge transformation in her life of where she used to carry this guilt and this shame of the things that she had done, and just wear this label in her community of a person who was a prostitute. She now has this freedom, and I actually asked her permission before I traveled to share this story because I would never want to share that with a large audience if it was not okay with her. But she feels such freedom in what Christ has done for her and so forgiven that she shares this story with everyone who she meets, and she's actually allowed us to do a little video that we put on our website that's so powerful. And she's just such a testimony to what Christ can do, not only physically in a life, but in a heart, that she just feels so transformed, and she so wants to be a good mother, and she is a great mother, and that God is just continuing to enable her to care for her children and to feel freedom from her past experiences. And she's become such a good friend of mine, and she comes over for dinner a lot, and we just share stories, and it's so fun to be able to sit with her in her brokenness and to share my brokenness and just to marvel at what God has done in both of our lives. Another story I want to share with you is the story of McCarray, who sadly 6 or 7 months ago was kind of just an annoyance in my life. In this community that I work in, where the ladies sell the necklaces and we do Bible study, he's essentially kind of the town drunk. And so I drive my car full of 13 kids into Mussessy, and I just want to find a place to park and get out and do Bible study. And he's always kind of wandering in the middle of the road and banging on the windows or just saying kind of crude things that I don't want my children to hear. And so I used to just kind of brush him aside. Would you please leave us alone? Would you please go somewhere else? And I guess the community felt the same way about him, because about 6 months ago, someone intentionally burnt down his house. And he was able to crawl out just in time to watch them go in as his house was on fire and steal all his belongings. And his leg was on fire. I don't think he even noticed because he was so drunk, but by the time the fire was put out on his leg, it had burnt him all the way to where his bone was showing, and literally like this entire part of his calf was just gone. And my social worker, Christine, had been in the community around that same time and was able to bring him to my house, and I'd never seen anything quite like this. And so I cleaned it up real good and bandaged it and took him to a nearby hospital where they said, well, you've done an okay job bandaging it, but you're going to have to bandage it every day so that it doesn't get infected. So I'm okay. So I took him home, and I actually asked him if he would be able to stay with us. We just moved about a year ago into this new house, and in the backyard there's this strip of like 3 cement rooms, and it's just a cement block with 3 doors and 3 rooms back there. And when we first moved in, I thought, what in the world is this in the back, and what am I going to do with it? And of course, God had plans that I didn't know about, which is kind of how my life works always. And he has allowed us with that little house back there to move in homeless families and homeless men, people who we probably wouldn't have otherwise been able to take into our home that can live right out there in the backyard, and we can still live in community and have a bit of separation in the evenings. And so I tried for a month or 2 to convince McCarray to move into this house, and he just didn't want to because he was so entrenched in his addiction that he needed to get home to where the alcohol was. And so he was willing, now that he didn't have a house, to just sleep outside in this community near the bar where he could easily access this alcohol. And so sometimes we would go, I was going every day to pick him up and bring him back to my house to bandage his wound, and sometimes I would go and he would have wandered somewhere and I wouldn't be able to find him. And I'll never forget, on Easter Sunday, finally finding him after like 4 days of not changing this bandage, and 4 days was the longest we had gone. The bandage had come off, so the wound had been open and exposed for a while. And on Easter Sunday, I had my children inside they had to finish cooking Easter dinner because I was laying on my belly in the grass tweezing maggots out of this man's leg because the infection had gotten so bad. And so at that point I said, listen, I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to lock you in this house back here for a little bit, or you're going to lose your leg. And I don't want you to lose your leg. And I know that you probably don't really care right now about your leg, but you're going to get sober, and then you're going to care about your leg. And so maybe one day you'll be happy with me. And so he started living with us, and after a couple days of letting his drunkenness wear off, he didn't really want so much to leave. And as I began talking to him, every day for about 30 minutes while I dressed this wound would kind of become our story time. And so for months, as I would dress this wound every day, he would tell me little pieces of his story. And it turns out he had gone all the way through secondary school. He had gone to part of university in Uganda. And when he found out he was HIV positive, he felt like there was no hope for him. He felt like he had nowhere to turn, and so he started drinking. And ever since then, his family had kind of shunned him. He doesn't know where any of his family members are. He really feels like he has no one in this world. And my 10-year-old piped up and said, "Oh, we can be your family." And so I thought, yeah, we can be your family. And so after he had told me all of his story, I remember he looked at me one day and he said, "Well, I don't have any stories left. Why don't you tell me a story?" And I remember watching both of our tears fall onto the tile floor as I told him the story of Jesus, who was sent to be his Savior and sent to redeem his life. And he said, "Well, I've never heard that story before." And so every day during bandaging time, I would tell the story again, or I would tell a different part of the story. And my children, thought that 30 minutes during bandaging time was just not enough. So during Bible time of homeschool, they would invite him in. And throughout the rest of the day when we weren't having school, I would see them in the backyard with the children's Bible, just talking to McCarra and explaining to him who Jesus was. And so McCarra came to accept Christ several months ago and has been going to church with us and has just really become such a wonderful part of our family from back there in the backyard. And even if I'm gone late at night, we have a gate around our compound, and if I'm gone late at night, he'll sit by the gate to make sure that there's someone to open it for me when I get home. And if I'm busy in the kitchen, I know that my kids are outside. If they're being quiet, I know they're outside in the back playing with McCarra and washing their clothes or something fun with him. And so just incredible to me. I just told my babysitter on the phone the other day, I really hope the wound doesn't become all skin while I'm here, because that means he's going to have to move out maybe, and I don't want him to move out. But he's been doing some work around the house for me and saving money that way, and he really just what he wants to do is buy a plot of land and build himself a small house outside the community of Missessi. He's able to say, "I don't want to go back to that community because I think that I'll start drinking again." And I'd like to put him back into vocational school. He wants to be a carpenter and learn to make some things that way. And so I know that this next phase of his life will be beautiful too. I'm just sad to see him leave our compound. But the wound is about this big now, so it's close. It's almost all skin, and he can fully use that leg. We do physical therapy. He does physical therapy with Grace, who has CP, and they walk around the yard together, just laps. And so what a neat way to watch God redeem his life. I don't know how much time I have, but I'm going to tell you one more. I want to tell you the story of a little girl named Josephine. A little bit different. She doesn't live with us, but she is a sponsored child through Mazima, and I met her about 2 years ago, I think, was when she entered the program, and she is one of 7 children. Both of their parents have died of HIV, and she's living with an uncle who's disabled. And so the children take on almost all of the parenting responsibility because the uncle's unable to walk, and so they walk about 2 miles to the well to fetch water. They dig in the garden for food. Amazima's now providing them with a lot of food to kind of ease that burden. They're so excited that they get to go to school. The best part, though, is that they are from a Muslim family. And so I've watched one by one as all 7 of the children have learned about Christ at Bible study on Saturday and have come to embrace Christ as their Savior and have been singing and dancing just with the joy of the Lord. And just a couple weeks before I left, Josephine came up and told me, she's maybe 7 or 8, she's still little, but she came up and told me that she had invited her uncle to come to Bible study. And so I'm excited to see what God will do with that, because I've seen so many Muslim children in our program who will beg and beg and beg and plead with their parents to please come to Bible study on Saturday. And when the parents come, almost always they continue to come. And after they've been coming for a while, almost always they accept Christ into their life. And so I'm excited to see what God is about to do with Josephine and with her uncle, and what that will look like in their lives. So I could stand up here and tell you stories all day and try to just prove over and over again that God is who he says he is, and he is faithful. But I think you already know that, and he just continues to prove it over and over again in my life. And I guess if I have any encouragement for you, I like to think of the illustration of Peter. You know, so often in my life I think, okay, God, too many children, too much, I don't know, I think you picked the wrong person, and I just mess up over and over again. And I like to look at Peter in the Bible, and he just kind of does goofy things over and over again, you know. When Jesus is resurrected and he's standing on the shore, and Peter, he's so excited about Jesus that he just jumps out of the boat. And the rest of the disciples are like, all right, we're going to row up to shore now. Peter's somewhere in the water. And when he gets so angry when the people come to crucify Jesus, and I feel that way sometimes, so angry about the injustice of the world, or so excited about what Jesus is doing that I do silly things. And I like to think of the illustration of Peter stepping out of the boat when Jesus asks him to come to him on the water. And he kind of takes this step of obedience, and then he thinks, oh wait, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I shouldn't do this. And he begins to sink, and Jesus is right there to grab hold of his hand and bring him out onto the water to do this impossible thing. And that's been such an encouragement in my life, that it's not about having an extraordinary plan. I didn't plan any of this. I can't even believe any of this sometimes. And it's not about knowing the path, but it's about taking that one step of obedience and knowing that even when you take the step of obedience and it seems a little crazy or you feel a little uncertain, Jesus is right there and faithful to grab hold of your hand. And so I just want to encourage you today that it doesn't have to look like going to Uganda. It doesn't have to look like adoption. Ministry looks like so many different things, but it's just about seeing the person in front of you and taking one step to obey and serve that person. And in these ordinary moments of saying yes to God and saying yes to the people in front of you, he creates this extraordinary life. And once we step out of the boat, we get to walk on the water.